What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. This is a story I started working on last week, and every day and every conversation, it kind of got more detailed and more layers. And it starts because I see an article. I see an article in the San Jose Mercury News saying Hugo Chavez has been released from the county jail. He had previously been sentenced to 105 years, right, for gang-related violence in San Jose. And there was rap music involved and everything else. And the court threw out his conviction and cut him loose. And so I was like, man, I want to learn more about that, So I started digging around. I started making some phone calls, doing my homework, as you guys expect. And what came from that is crazy. It's prison gangs and green lighting neighborhoods in San Jose, and then the hood being told, well, you need to take out X amount of Southsiders to get the green light off. Then the guy who makes that call ends up testifying against people when they get caught in court. There's a whole crew in the Santa Clara County Jail of, NF and NR members who have dropped out and are all kind of conspiring with each other and telling on folks and flipping new, witnesses and informants and the rap music stuff and the corrupt prosecution, which Santa Clara County is known for. The gang expert, or one of the gang experts in this case, Whittington, is somebody that I'm familiar with from doing gang expert work for defense attorneys in Santa Clara County. So there's just a lot of layers to the story, and I'm going to try not to make this video exceptionally long and get into it all. I'm going to let the paperwork guide where the conversation goes, but all that stuff I just mentioned will come up. I'm not going to read every word of it because it is a very long document, but I'll link to it in the description of the video so you guys can look it up and read it word for word yourself if that's what you want to do. A quick note, because this weekend kind of threw a curveball, right? I did a video Saturday in reaction to a video that John from Paradigm did about the incident in Salinas Valley months ago. I had no way to know that he was going to do that video. I did not plan on doing content over the weekend, but when it was sent to me and I saw it, I was like, this is too easy, it's too quick, and I'm trying to advertise my reaction channel. So I said, man, why not? Right, let me just make a quick little video before I take my son shopping. And I didn't know Birkenstocks were still in style. He was like, I need these Birks, Pop. Whatever. He got them $180 later. But anyway, so I digress. That has nothing to do with this. John is featured in this story. A lot of people are featured in this story. But I know that some of you, based on the comments of the video on Saturday, are going to see this like there's a campaign against him. I don't campaign against anybody. This whole thing, man, you're just trying to tear him down. Look, if somebody is built up, if somebody can be torn down by telling the truth, then they're built up on lies, and that's not my fault, right? I don't come on here and lie about people. But nonetheless, this is not a video about John. I didn't put him in the thumbnail or tag him in the title. But he is featured in this video, and it's just by coincidence that he chose to post something that was so wrong and easy and quick to react to. So nonetheless, let's get into this video. Like I said, I'm not going to read every word. This is centered around violence that happened in 2008. They were indicted in 2012. Gabriel Franco and Hugo Chavez. Hugo goes by the name Juice. Hugo Juice. You guys get it. Gabriel Franco goes by Trigger. They were found guilty on 2 counts of attempted murder, 1 count of first-degree murder. And then Franco also has another shooting at a house that he's charged with. And all the enhancements, right? Again, this was indicted in 2012 based on crimes in 2008. So all the felony murder stuff and the gang stuff and everything else, they got hit with all of it. And eventually they were found guilty. So let's scroll down here. Grand jury first indicted defendants in 2012, but the trial deadlocked on all counts charged against both defendants. In 2018, the prosecution filed a 6-count consolidated indictment and information. Prosecution charged Chavez and Franco with 3 counts. 1, attempted murder of Ricardo Padilla with premeditation. 2, Raul Lopez, murder of Raul Lopez. and 3, attempted murder of Victor Razo with premeditation. Interesting point is, in 2018, before that second trial, the DA offered Chavez 7 years. Take 7 years, plead out to lesser charges, of course. Take 7 years, you can walk. He gambled, right? He gambled probably because, they got a hung jury on the first trial. He figured, nah, man, you can't get me. It's a rough gamble, but it's not unusual for DAs to do that. There was another case in Santa Clara County revolving around violence that happened in 2008 also, but it was Southsiders. This dude Sapo from VST, older cat, Peruvian dude. He was charged with a hot one. There, some tweaker northerner moved to VST's neighborhood. A couple youngsters, drove down the street and knocked him down on his porch, right? And got busted for it, right? Nobody was saying that Sapo pulled the trigger or anything else, but he was arrested and convicted for calling the shot. And then he winds up, I'd had nothing to do with that trial, right? That was way before I was doing that kind of work. He winds up coming back to court on an ineffective assistance of counsel claim and getting a new trial. That's when I become involved with his defense attorney. I am his gang expert, right? Because as a gang expert, I didn't do it based on what hood you were from. I did it based on, can I help your case, right? So he's from VST. He's charged with the murder of this northerner. And I worked on his case. We were in the midst of that trial when the DA came and said, hey, and the DA knew that they were losing, right? They probably weren't going to win that trial. And so turned around and told Sapo, plead out to lesser charges, will sentence you to like 15 years or something. But at that point, it was time served. He'd already been down well over 10. He took it, right? He took it and walked out of jail. I think a couple weeks later, he was home by Christmas type of thing. Rather than take the risk of getting a hung jury or found not guilty. So it's a gamble. DAs are known to do that, right? Ah, man, looks like we're losing, but I just want to get some kind of a conviction. I don't care about taking you off the streets. I just want it on paper that I got a conviction. And so there's an example of two people who chose two different paths and how it worked out for them. But anyways, let's go on with this one. So they wind up getting charged. Like I said, all the kind of enhancement stuff. The second jury trial began in July 2018. November 2018, the jury rendered guilty verdicts on all counts as charged and found all enhancements true. As to Franco, the trial court imposed an aggregate sentence of 170 years to life, consecutive to 1 year in prison. Chavez trial court imposed an aggregate sentence of 105 years to life in prison. Factual overview. The charges arose from 3 violent incidents in 2008 at separate locations in San Jose. Reed Street stabbing. Ricardo Padilla was walking home in the evening when a passing car stopped in front of him and 2 men got out. The men stabbed Padilla multiple times, but he escaped and survived. Prosecution alleged Chavez was driving the car and that Franco was one of the 2 men who stabbed Padilla. The other one was supposedly Little Man from the mob. We'll talk about him in a minute. He testified in this case. Auburn Avenue shooting, counts 2 and 3. Later that same evening, Victor Razo and Raul Lopez were in a car stopped at a stop sign on Auburn Avenue when a gunman fired multiple shots in the car, striking both occupants. Razo managed to drive the car away from the shooter and survive. Raul Lopez, who was sitting in the passenger seat, died a week later. Prosecution alleged Franco was the shooter. Chavez drove him to and from the scene. And then the McCreary Avenue shooting, 2 weeks later, a group of adults and children are outside a house on McCreary Ave when 2 cars pulled up in front of the house. Men from one of the cars fired 11 or more gunshots at the group. 2 persons in the group were shot but survived. Prosecution alleged Franco was one of the shooters. Chavez was not involved. Prosecution alleged Chavez and Franco, aka Trigger, were members of the mob, a subset of the Norteño gang, and Chavez and Franco were motivated by a desire to kill members of rival Sureño gangs. There's a lot more to that story. We'll get to in a second. Background expert testimony. Investigator Mike Whittington, an expert in Hispanic criminal street gangs, testified for the prosecution as follows. And if you had any gang case, right, if you're Raza North or South and had any gang case during that era and you went to trial, Mike Whittington was probably a part of it. And he prides himself on like speaking Nahuatl, being fluent in Spanish. And so he, yeah, he's a character. He's a character, but he performs well on the stand. Uh, 2007, 2008, the two principal groups of Hispanic criminal street gangs in San Jose were the Norteños and rival Sureños. And then it goes just the cookie cutter stuff, right? Their origins, blah, blah, blah. Um, the letter N and 14 and all that nonsense, right? So we'll skip all that. The mob was a Norteño gang in San Jose that came together from 5 neighborhood-based subsets. West Side Mob, Eastbound Locos Mob, San Carlos Boys, Barrio Alma Locos, and Barrio Libre. Mob members used the letters MOB to refer to my only brothers. It's funny because the little snitch gang that was in Santa Clara County was ORB, our real brothers. I wonder if it was a play on words, intentional or not. Whittington opined that Franco was a mob member. 2008, Franco had numerous gang-related tattoos, including a large MOB tattoo on his neck, Huelga bird across the back of his head, Mobstero above his right eye, and North and Side on the backs of his hands, among others. 2005, he was documented as wearing a Mongolian hairstyle, which was worn by San Jose Norteños to indicate the person is a torpedo. This means they are a warrior who is committed to doing violence and expected to be in the first round of assaults. That was cute. In 2006, Franco was documented as wearing a red belt with a 14 buckle. The expert reviewed numerous photos of Franco with other mob members. So that's Franco, that's Trigger, right? And Trigger was legitimately, a part of the mob. Chavez was not. Let's see what this same guy says about Chavez. Whittington also opined that Chavez was a gang member in 2008. When the prosecutor asked Whittington what his opinion was based on, Whittington responded, I base it on the facts I've seen from this case, the context he's had with other individuals, I think that meant contacts, the fact that he was the one who produced the lyrics or was part of the production of Norteño-related propaganda, which is an interesting phrase for some rap music, as well as information I've heard in this case as far as his status on the main lines, his shadowing and his participation in the assaults in this case. So when he says main lines, he's talking about the county jail. And what's interesting about this, right, is Whittington is basically saying, well, if Chavez wasn't a Northerner, he wouldn't be allowed to program with the Northerners, and he is programming with them, therefore he must be one. Fun little side note, when they get convicted in this second trial, and Chavez winds up going to prison, he only lasts like a couple months and winds up locking it up and going S&Y. I've heard different stories. One is that they asked him to participate in a removal, and he declined. The other is he just didn't want to do it. But again, this dude ain't never been a gang member. He wasn't a gang member in the streets. He didn't want to be a gang member in prison. People like that, I have a little bit more understanding. Like, bro, I didn't sign up for this ever. And I'm thrown into this murder case that I ain't got nothing to do with some people I really ain't got that much to do with. He was put in a bad spot from jump. And so I don't really hold that, against him. But it's like, damn, it's being said you're a gang member because you're programming with the Northerners in the county. But that fool hits prison and don't even make it 6 months before he's not programming with the Northerners in prison. So on cross-examination, Whittington conceded he had never seen any photos of tattoos on Chavez, nor had Whittington seen any photos of Chavez hanging out with West Side Mob members, making gang signs with his hands, or wearing obvious gang colors. Whittington relied on Chavez's contacts and association with gang members, and then they bring up Gangster Gucci, Cheeks, Cachetes, right? Javier Garcia. You guys have been watching YouTube for a while, may recognize that name. He's from the mob, right? And is very open about that. I'm not betraying any secrecy. Cheeks was locked up during this time. But he's from the mob, and he has great content. I'll link to his channel in the upper right-hand corner of the screen right now. He gives you a lot of history about San Jose, right? And about Southerners and about Northerners, and he's kind of an encyclopedia when it comes to street gang stuff in San Jose. But he also has a ton of content about history and culture and civil rights and finances. And it's just all around a really great channel with a lot of videos. If you haven't seen it, I suggest you go check it out and go through his catalog. He doesn't really post that often anymore. He's obviously much more well versed and qualified to talk about the mob and all this history stuff than I am. But I'm gonna keep it to within what I know. But shout out to Cheeks, man, and his channel again, Gangsta Gucci on YouTube, and he does rap music, and that's how Chavez gets on the scene, right? So let me explain this real quick. There's this DA Pandori who has it in for the mob, always did, right? And I believe he was a city councilman for a while or something, and the mob was in his neighborhood. Then he wanted to run for mayor, and he just made it his mission to kind of take down the mob. Cheeks was one of his main targets, right? All the time. So Chavez made the beats for Cheeks' music, right? For Gangsta Gucci's music. And Gangsta Gucci's music talked about the mob, talked about gang violence and all that shit, right? It is gangster rap at its core. But that doesn't mean that Chavez was a gang member. He had a recording studio in his grandma's backyard. Like, he was going to college, he played soccer, he was around some folks from the mob. He knew some of them, but he wasn't a gang member. But his name, Juice, and Chavez, he kind of, I think, got on the radar because in the credits on the album, he was a producer or something like that. And at one time was part owner of Beatdown Records, right? That's not the case anymore. But way back when they first started, he was. And I think that's what gets him in the mix here. So Whittington conceded that other than the crimes charged in his case, he had no evidence Chavez committed crimes on behalf of the mob. Mob member Alan Ruby. Alan Little Man Ruby, a former mob member, testified under grant of immunity as a witness for the prosecution. So let's talk about Little Man, right? And let's talk a little bit about the mob and their situation. So the mob had a adversarial relationship, should we say, with both prison gangs, right, the NF, and some neighborhoods, some northern neighborhoods in San Jose. They did not drive around hunting northerners. They were not anti-northerners. They were, in fact, northerners. But they prioritized their neighborhood and they didn't tolerate bullying, right? So, and there's incidents in this that I'll explain as we go on, but if they're at a party and there's a dude there from the mob and some people from another northern neighborhood jump on him, the mob is going to retaliate, right? And they're going to retaliate more extreme than whatever was done to their homeboy, okay? And they did that regardless of any stuff about red on red or anything else. But if there ain't no red on red, then stop messing with our homeboys and we won't circle back and mess with yours. So it's very tense, right? And they discouraged people when they went to prison from getting involved in politics, but not because they were anti. It's just, hey, if you go to prison and you sign up for something else, now you have competing loyalties, right? Our loyalty is to the people we grow up with in our community. You sign up for something else, you now have a loyalty to them. What happens when that loyalty to them butts heads with your loyalty to the neighborhood? Rather than have that issue, stay away from the politics, program and do things the right way, but don't sign up for shit, right? Because you're already signed up for something. You're signed up for the neighborhood. So there's a long history of them having issues, shall we say, okay? And especially at this time, and I'll get into the green light and all that in a second, but Little Man was a hitter from the mob, by all accounts, okay? And he was absolutely a mob member, and he laid it, he put in a lot of work. He is in prison when this, first indictment happens in 2012, right? This is all in response to the second trial, but these kind of facts kind of go back to the first trial. So he's in prison on an unrelated case, High Desert or Susanville. I don't recall which one, but up there somewhere. When Sammy, right, NF dropout, who we'll talk about in a second, Sammy tells on him. right? Snitches on him for 3 murders during this green light era. So little man comes back to the county, but while he's in prison, he's having issues, right? He's having politics issues because he's from the mob and he got that little chip on his shoulder and is just having a rough time, right? He's getting politicked against. Now he comes down to the county jail, gets super politicked against in the county jail, right? Of this whole anti-mob sentiment. There was a lot of propaganda put out there about the mob for a long time. And so while he's in the county, he's being escorted and he looks and he sees there's a conference room. In this conference room is John from Paradigm News, right? Sammy Ramirez, Blackie, who we'll talk about in a second. I got a whole list of people. Rue, Trigger from 12th Street, Cheeto from Mountain View, Pat Martinez, Turtle, Del Rio from Palomas. There's all these different people that are former NF or NR members that are cooperating with law enforcement, and they're all working together. So when he sees that, he's like, man, what kind of shit is this? Right? Like, I'm out here putting it down for my neighborhood. I'm out here doing all this stuff. And these politicking dudes are all in here fucking talking to the cops. Like, there's no winning in this game, you know? And he winds up locking it up. He PCs up in the county jail. This is not going to deal with it. He wasn't telling, but he PC'd up, right? Now he's facing these 3 murders that got, he got told on out of nowhere by a guy that was in politics. When he PCs up, they move him and they put him with John from Paradigm, okay? And therein starts the conversation. Bro, can help you with these 3 murders if you, get a hold of Livingston. I got a phone number, blah, blah, blah. And you can help yourself, right? They're looking to get all these dudes. And little man decides to do it, right? Which is not anybody else's fault, right? I don't think folks that tell can blame other people for them telling. He obviously made the decision, but he flips. And when he flips, he throws Chavez in the mix, right? And I think, I don't know, I can't prove it, but it seems that he threw Chavez in the mix because Pandora and these dudes wanted Chavez to be arrested for something. And so he was like, I'll just make him the driver, in these cases. And then gives this testimony where he's fucking lying. He admits to being a pathological liar. His old lady gets up there. It's like he's a master manipulator and a liar. He's a hitter. Don't get me wrong. That fool will crack your melon. He'll take your wind. But you also can't believe anything he fucking says. So there's that part, right? So Alan Little Man Ruby, a former mob member, testified under a grant of immunity as a witness for the prosecution. As set forth in detail below, Rudy testified that he and Franco were the 2 stabbers at Reed Street and that Chavez was driving the car. Ruby testified that later that night, Chavez drove him and Franco to Dobrin Avenue where Franco shot Razo and Raul. Ruby further testified that he and Franco were 2 of the shooters at McCreary Avenue. Ruby had known Franco since 2006 and knew Franco very well. Ruby described Franco as crazy and he likes to put in work, meaning that if he sees a Sureño, he's going to do something. Ruby testified that Chavez would come around and kick it with us. We're brothers, but Ruby had never seen him put in work. Ruby testified Chavez was a mob member because he's from the mob himself, because he grew up there. He knew a lot of older people, so he's from the mob. Chavez did not have any gang tattoos. He had never been jumped in. Ruby testified that someone has to be jumped in to be a mob member. So he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. But Chavez kicks it with us and he's like a mobster. Ruby had known Chavez for a long time. They were always together, Ruby testified. We always had a bond together. He felt like Chavez was a brother. On cross-examination, Ruby conceded he had previously told the police Chavez was not really a mob member and that Chavez was just a pretty boy who was pretty much mob because he'd grown up around him. Ruby could not remember the names of Chavez's sister, brother, or grandmother. Chavez did not have a gang moniker, which is true. The whole Juice thing was just for the rap because his name is Hugo, right? Hugo, Juice, you get it. But Ruby said he called Chavez DJ because he recorded music for the neighborhood. A police officer who interviewed Ruby in 2011 testified that when Ruby was shown a picture of Chavez, Ruby identified him as Hugo but did not know his last name. Among other tattoos, Ruby had mob and live tattooed on his eyelids, and MLB on his stomach in large block letters. 2009, he was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon and making criminal threats. He admitted to gang allegations to both offenses. On cross-examination, Ruby admitted engaging in numerous shootings, attempted shootings, stabbings, other violent crimes, in addition to the offenses charged in this case. He also admitted to numerous lies he told the police in the course of his interactions with them. He admitted he had lied to the big homies in the gang about committing violent killings and stabbings he did not actually commit. He told these lies to protect his own life and preserve his standing in the gang. He would search through newspapers and the internet to learn the facts and circumstances of crimes others had committed so that he could report them for himself. Ruby told Sammy Ramirez, an NF regiment commander, that he had committed a murder he did not commit. So this is the dude that's saying Chavez is a gang member, right? You got Ruby, who's up there telling you I lied at fucking everybody. You got the gang cop, who's like, I mean, he's a gang member because of what happened in this case, which that's actually not legal in California anymore, but at the time it was. He's a gang member because of these charges that he's not been convicted of. 2010, he was arrested, put in county jail for charges he feared might result in a 3-strike conviction with a life sentence. That was the murders. Ruby knew Sammy Ramirez was in protective custody at the point. He believed Ramirez was providing information to law enforcement. Yeah, because he had seen him over there. Decided he needed to protect himself, so he contacted the police and prosecutor to cooperate with them while he was John Selly. Ruby and the prosecution entered into a proffer agreement on July 26, 2010. He knew he would have to give them names of other people and not only admit to his own participation in criminal offenses if he wanted to assure his freedom. So he's like, look, man, we're going to have to give you some time. You're not going to do a long time. Ruby received a sentence of 9 years, 8 months for 2 robberies, and he was not prosecuted for any other offenses. I'm skipping through to the bottom, right? And it says that he had pled guilty to offenses even though he didn't think he was guilty. He knew the police and prosecutor were controlling his freedom, so he was willing to take a deal and go along with what they wanted. Monique Lopez was his girlfriend. She was the driver in one of the shootings. That was about it. Monique did not recognize Chavez in court. She testified she did not know him and she had never seen him before. Sammy Ramirez. Sammy Black Ramirez, a former NF regiment commander, testified under a grant of immunity as a witness for the prosecution. His entire body is covered in tattoos. When he was 19, he was sentenced to 19 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter and other offenses. Happened to be a lot of high-ranking NF members in jail while he was fighting his case. He had to make a name for himself. He had somebody stabbed and was put in the SHU for a couple years. Prisoners in the SHU were in solitary confinement except for an hour and a half each day or 3 hours a week at Pelican Bay, where they were released into a prison yard with other Northerners as well as members of the AB, Nazi lowriders, Sureños, and other prison gangs. So that's not how it works in the Bay, right? In the Bay, you go out to the yard by yourself. I think he's describing the Corcoran Gladiator fight times, but nonetheless, it is what it is. He spends 12 and a half years in the SHU, 2.5 at Corcoran, 10 in the Bay. March 2005, Ramirez was paroled to San Jose. He had orders from the NF to create a street regiment, right? Charlie Campa was already in command of an NF regiment selling drugs in the San Jose area. They reached out to Ramirez to work out an arrangement. He was put in charge of his own regiment. He worked out a system where Campa was the main supplier. He was turning in the money and people I had with me at that time. Basically, I was the muscle and getting people in line and to do what had to be done for the benefit of the NF. Over a couple months, he put together his own regiment of street gang members. Some of them were mob, some were palomas. Infighting between these gang members became a nuisance and a headache and got in the way of making money, okay? His mother was living in downtown San Jose at the time. One morning, Ramirez got a phone call from his brothers telling him his mother's house had been shot up. He called around and learned that Trigger from the mob, Franco, had done it. Ramirez's brother had gotten into a fist fight at a party the night before. His brother got the best of the other guy, so West Side Mob got all butthurt, quote unquote, and ended up shooting at Ramirez's mom's house. So that's not true, right? The shooting at the house was true. Whoever did it, I don't know. But that's not how it went down. Ramirez's brothers, right, were having a party at a house, which happens to be the house also where his mom lives. They're from some other hood, B something, I don't remember. But some mob members showed up just to party, right? Just to show up and kick it. And his brothers, Sammy's brothers, got a little too excited and wound up pulling pistols on the mob members. And so the mob guys got in their car and they left and they went home and got guns and they came back and they lit the whole fucking party up. But this is an example of how narratives change, right? Of how stories change. See, this makes it look like the mob literally just got all butthurt and came back and committed this egregious offense of shooting at somebody's mom's house, right? Especially somebody of status at the time. When in reality, nah, bro, it's your brothers got out of pocket and pulled guns on these dudes and didn't use them. And so they had guns used on them very shortly thereafterwards. And so yeah, that was kind of common at that time, right? And then this whole trigger offered to bring me 2 bodies, blah, blah, blah. Ramirez had his brothers, another mob member, a couple guys from West Side Mob meet with Franco at a park, beat the shit out of him. Franco was apologetic and offered to bring Ramirez 2 bodies. Franco also did not want to say who else was involved in shooting up Ramirez's mother's house. He said, I know it's weird, but it's kind of the stand-up thing to do. He offered to make it right. Ramirez testified that red on red was prohibited. People would get killed for that, and that was NF policy. But members of West Side Mob and other subsets continued to engage in red on red violence. Ramirez testified there was always just dumb kid shit, crossing out gang tags. That's how a bunch of fighting starts, and it's causing a rift where it's affecting my money coming in. So it is an issue. Ramirez holds these meetings. Everybody says that they're going to be cool, but then they wind up going back to doing it. Ramirez decided the gang members needed to be disciplined, so he put a green light on West Side Mob and the EBLM. This was shortly after his mother's house had been shot up. The way I see it, these youngsters didn't want to listen. A green light is anybody from those gangs, from those neighborhoods, are open game. You guys could shoot at them, you could stab them, whatever. They happen to die, then hopefully some of the other street gangs and other members of street regiments will understand that there's repercussions. If you don't want to listen, there's consequences. The green light was against both eastbound and west side subsets of the mob. Ramirez was arrested February 2008. So there's some truth to that, right? There was a shooting at the house. The mob was greenlit by Sammy and the NF, right? Well, let's just say Sammy was greenlit by them. Then it was agreed, and there's other stuff that involved Palmas, and Palmas almost got greenlit, but it was kind of tricky politics, and I'm not even going to go into all of that. But it was said, hey, we'll lift the green light if you bring us back 10 bodies of Southsiders. Okay? Then we'll lift the green light. During that period of time, I think there was 13 or 14 Southsiders, or people perceived to be Southsiders, who lost their life. And there was 20-something very serious attempted homicides on Southsiders or people perceived to be Southsiders, right? So it definitely ratcheted up the level of violence. But it's funny, Sammy issues the green light. Like, what kind of twist is this? He issues the green light. He agrees to lift the green light if you bring back 10 bodies. These dudes are engaged in violence, which is in furtherance of getting that green light lifted. And now it's Sammy, the dude who issued the green light, that's on the stand explaining it all and telling on him. It's crazy, right? Ramirez was arrested in February of 2008, at which point the infighting had not been resolved. Green light stopped at some point when Carlos Laughing Boy Ramirez stepped up, took responsibility for the infighting. Switch from Palmas, right? Palmas has some stuff going on too. He thought he might have lifted the green light in the summer of 2007, but he wasn't sure. Laughing Boy's cousin had been killed by Southerners. He wanted to use the green light on the mob to get them to focus on Sureños. So another green light order was put out about doing kills of Sureños. Mob members were expected to kill Sureños so no more red on red violence would happen to the mob members. There was no set number of Sureños had to be killed. Laughing Boy just wanted payback. It was 10, just to clear that up. After he was arrested in February 2008, Ramirez faced a possible sentence of 175 years to life, consecutive to 36 years in state prison if he was convicted on all charges. He conceded while he was in jail, he knew he had a lot of information that law enforcement would be interested in. You fucking think? And that he could save himself from a life sentence. He entered a plea and cooperation agreement in 2009 and was released from custody in 2013. It's just wild. So Joseph Tarango is another former mob member who testified for the prosecution. Um, he's just saying that Franco told him about the stuff that happened, right? And then he talks about violence that he did. He stabbed a Southerner at 7-Eleven in April of '08. In June of '08, he assisted another person in stabbing two young girls. That just is weird. I don't know the circumstances around that. So in '08, he was arrested, put in custody, learned he was facing 2 counts of attempted murder with gang enhancements and other allegations. Faced a possible sentence of 34 years and 8 months in prison if convicted. He was in the county jail from 2008 till 2013. Functioned as a northerner in jail, part of former leadership structure where he was in the general population. It says basically he would get information about what they're charged with, would look at their paperwork and discovery, make sure they weren't a snitch. Isn't that ironic? He was cellmates with Eddie Rascal Sandoval, who was one of the shooters at McCurry Ave. He looked at his discovery and included statements made by Monique, the girl who testified earlier. Sandoval had a master log of everything she was telling the police, but he didn't think it was complete. 2008, Alan Ruby was housed in the same jail as well. Tango and Ruby were friends. They committed crimes together, but says they never talked about the shootings while they were in jail together, which doesn't really make any sense because from my understanding of many people that were in Santa Clara County Jail at this time, there was a whole network of informants, right? And Sammy had testified in other cases. This whole thing of Sammy and the green light and the mob stuff also kind of brought in some of the Palomas guys. John winds up testifying against the Palomas guys and testified against the Kramer regiment and testified. I mean, he testified a lot, right? In a lot of different cases. There was a whole network of them, right? The ORB, the Our Real Brothers. And they would share information. They would decode messages. They would at times be put in positions to have conversations with people. And those people didn't know that they were talking to somebody who was a snitch. And then they would go relay that information to law enforcement. So there's that, right? Now there's the details of the stabbings, how they all went down. I'm not going to get into all of that. You guys can look at it and see that for yourself. The gist of it is this. At this second trial, they have a juror, okay? And I'm scrolling down to find that part. But they have a juror. Lots of people talked, as you can see, right? Some of the people at the house with the Southerners talked. And so there's a juror during trial number 2 who says, hey, I'm seeing gang members come in the audience of the court. Can we shut it down? Can we make this private? Because these gang members are coming. And here it is. Both defendants contend the trial court erred by denying their mid-trial motion to discharge the juror for cause after the juror expressed concern for her safety. The Attorney General contends the trial court acted within its discretion by denying the motion. 3 weeks into trial, juror number 11 spoke up in open court at the end of the day just before the jury was sent home. She addressed the court as follows. Quote, I don't know if this is possible, and I'm only speaking for myself. I'm wondering, given the nature of the testimony and reoccurring people in the audience that, based on descriptions of what gang members look like and tattoos and so on, look possibly as if they're gang members, and it makes me uncomfortable. I don't know if it's required that the audience be open. And then the court told her it's the law, right? You have to have an open courtroom. The public is allowed to come in. And she's like, well, I'm just worried essentially that these people might like follow me home. You know, they have my name and my information from the very beginning. So they sealed that information. And she described it as spooky and frightening. But the court said, no, you stay. The issue with that is if a juror is saying, hey, I'm scared from the testimony that's being offered, these people in the audience look like gang members. It sounds like gangs are dangerous enough. Maybe they're going to want to hurt me because I'm a juror on this case. That suggests that her decision making, she's already leaning towards the you guys are guilty phase. She already kind of has them identified as gang members and as potentially guilty. But the court said no. the court wound up talking to the rest of the jurors. Some of the other jurors expressed the same concerns. And at the end of the day, they said, fine. How does this get back to court? And then we'll end this video because it's actually pretty damn long. It comes back, or the sentence gets vacated primarily on the rap stuff. So these rap lyrics, right? The Gangsta Gucci albums, I think were from 2004, but they were definitely from years prior to this incident. Okay. Chavez didn't write any of those lyrics. He didn't write lyrics to any rap song. He wasn't a rapper. The DA's argument was, for you to participate in making this gangster rap music, you must be sympathetic to the views expressed in it, which is a stretch, right? But the court accepted it. The court accepted it. So they read the lyrics to Cheeks' music in closing arguments all throughout the trial. Like, they flooded the jury with the lyrics of Gangster Gucci, Cheeks Cachete's music, his words, and read them off to the jury over and over and pinned that on Chavez and said, well, Chavez's name is on the album cover and Chavez made the beats. How would you do this if you didn't agree? They must all believe and feel the same way, which again is a hell of a stretch, right? And really doesn't make a lot of sense. The court agreed with it, but then the appellate court was like, nah, and it is significantly prejudicial because you don't actually have any reliable evidence that Chavez is a gang member. Their main snitch that was there, right, Little Man, says he's a gang member, but then also says he lies all the time. And even the gang investigator says, I think he's a gang member just because of this, nothing before. I never seen him with gang members or dressed like a gang member, throwing up gang signs. So it's very weak evidence against Chavez. The witnesses at the scenes of violence, which I didn't get into here, no witnesses described seeing Chavez. In one case, they describe only 2 people being in the car, not 3. Well, Chavez driving in 2 shooters means there would have to be at least 3 people. Witnesses said there was only 2 people. People who saw all this violence, nobody points to Chavez, right? The only thing was the lyrics. And why? Because Santa Clara County has a history of this, and I'm sure a lot of counties do. But this dude, Pandori, he pinned a murder on this cat. What was his name? He got like $12 million. Lionel Rubacalva, right? No. He pinned a murder on this dude when he wasn't even in the city of San Jose when it happened. And there was evidence. I think he was in Hollister or something. And on his phone, it pinged off Hollister, a cell tower in Hollister. But while the murder supposedly happening in San Jose, he had used a debit card out there and they had receipts of that. They had proof, but they didn't hand all of that over to his defense attorneys. So they pinned a murder on him, right? Same thing. He was from the mob, this era of violence, that was happening. They pinned a murder on him, gave him a life sentence or whatever it was. Eventually, he gets that thrown out and he gets fully exonerated, gets like $12 million, right? And he didn't do the whole prison thing either, right? He went to prison. He stuck around longer than Chavez did, but he wound up PCing up. He told on the whole chain of command and everything. Like, he went out backwards. But then comes home and gets all this money and buys these clubs in San Jose. And so I guess now he's cool again. And there's all kinds of actives that kick it with him on a frequent basis. Despite that, streets and prison, I guess it really doesn't matter, right? Times have changed. So this same guy, Pandori, is behind all of this. He's behind these prosecutions. He's behind this. The belief is Sammy and John and others cooperated with Livingston and Pandori and kind of knew, right, that listen, man, if I could throw these couple murders on Little Man and he's catching the blues, right? He's not going to hold up. Get him back down here to the county. We know he's going to have a hard time in the county because even though we're over here in PC, we know what's going on. We know they're going to be up on his helmet. If he breaks and winds up locking it up, man, just throw him in there with John and we can get him to flip, and it worked. So there was a lot of behind the scenes conspiring that was happening to target the mob. So the mob was fighting on two fronts. They have law enforcement being brutally unethical, right? And also they have some affiliates, right? Some gang members in the streets and in prison politicking against them in a pretty rough way and creating their own little propaganda lines. And that's just been the story of the mob, man, for since like the early 90s, I think. So there you have it. They winds up getting thrown out. Like I said, I'll leave this document. You guys can read it if you're into that stuff or you want to see more of the particulars. Like I said, shortly after this was then the Palmas case. And so there you have it. Help others move with excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Help your community because they need you. And yeah, let me know in the comments, man. What do you think? What is the craziest part of this story to you? Because I think there's a lot of crazy parts. So what to you kind of sticks out the most in this story? Let me know in the comments, man. And stay tuned. We got more content coming.